share my screen or
You should be able to. I think I made you a co-host, so.
Yeah, it looks like I can.
Okay,
Hold
great.
on one sec. Okay. Do you see it? My screen?
We do.
Awesome. All right. So I'm not going to be too long, only about like 20, 30 minutes. Just kind of touch on the NFIP's new rating algorithm, risk rating 2.0, and get into details now that it's been out for, we've been using it since August. It went into effect October of last year, but we've been using it since August because people, were closing on houses. They might go under contract in August and then come up in October to actually purchase the house. So we've been using it since August. So I got a pretty good feel for it. I've been doing a lot of these presentations for towns. I've done one with David Marstead. He's with FEMA and is really the head of this NFIP's risk rating 2.0 program. And I believe that's where some of you may have saw me at NJFM presenting. So yeah, I've been doing this a lot. And if you want this done for maybe your town specifically or whatever, feel free to reach out to me individually. I'll send out in the chat my info. And I'm always here to help with whether it's presenting or answer questions or whatever. But a little bit about us and myself. My name's Tyler Ardrin. My company's called Risk Reduction Plus Group. We specialize in flood insurance. Some of you may have heard of my other company, SmartVent, Foundation Flood Openings, floodproofing.com. We've been in business 20 plus years now, promoting sound floodplain management. All of my staff, including myself, are certified floodplain managers. We're also licensed insurance brokers. So we're able to bridge the gap between flood mitigation, how to build properly in flood zones, and the insurance world, which is a great marriage. I do outreaches like this in all states. I do it nationwide. I educate the real estate industry a lot, just because they're dealing a lot with people buying houses, moving into flood areas, and they need to be educated so that they can educate their homeowners when going into these new flood zones. So first, just to go over a brief overview of what the NFIP is and what it was, and then I'll get into why it's changing and then what it's become. So the National Flood Insurance Program was formed in 1968. And the reason it was formed was back then you could get flood insurance through private companies, just like you get homeowners and auto insurance. And they no longer wanted to offer the flood peril. So insurance perils are wind, lightning, fire, et cetera, flood. They no longer wanted to offer flood as a peril because it's the riskiest peril out of all the insurance perils. And when it happens, it could put a company out of business. Just pretend Travelers did flood insurance back then in the 60s. If they had 50-60% of Ocean City, New Jersey, I'm just throwing random stuff out there, and it were to flood, that could be a significant hit on their book of business. So they got out of it, and that's when the government had to step in. And the goal really was to protect structures built in floodplains, but also allow people to purchase houses in flood zones, because if they're purchasing a house in a flood zone, they're required to have flood insurance in a special flood hazard area. So the government had to step in and form this program. And it's broken up into 3 different sectors. Here we have your floodplain management sector. That's going to be your building codes and zoning. Most of you are working on that side of things. Hazard identification, flood mapping, typically it's outsourced to engineering firms, the Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera, determining who's in a special flood hazard area. And like I said, if they are in an A to B zone, they are required to have flood insurance. And as long as the community participates in the NFIP, then they're able to get potentially low-cost flood insurance. And it just depends on kind of where they are now. And I'll go over that here in a few minutes of how they are rating properties now with risk rating 2.0. So previously, risk rating 1.0, the way that they rated properties, post-firm properties needed an elevation certificate. It was required. The reason why is post-firm homes weren't eligible for subsidized rates. So they had to get an elevation certificate because the way that they rated properties in risk rating 1.0 was on elevation difference. So they determine where the BFE is, where the first floor level is, and take that difference. So, you have a house that's at 9, let's just say, slab on grade, just for easy numbers and everything. BFE's at 9, they're a 0. Back in risk rating 1.0, a zero would pay $800 to $1,200 a year for flood insurance, depending on their coverage and everything. So back then they would just take these four things, no matter where you were. If you were in Florida and if you were in the middle of the country, if you were a zero, you paid between $800 to $1,200 a year for flood insurance. So that was risk rating 1.0. Now, here's just the reason why. So on the left, this is the reason for the cause of reform. On the left, you'll see how much premium was generated in each given year. So during 2005, everybody who had National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance, paid into the pot $1.9 billion total. But then when we look at the right, that's how much money was paid out. In 2005, almost $19 billion was paid out. And you can see 2012, same thing, 2017, same thing. Even those years in the middle, the program ran at a deficit. 2008, $5 billion, 2011, $4 billion. Needless to say, the NFIP is billions and billions of dollars in debt to the U.S. Treasury. And the reason why the insurance industry in general, because I do all insurance, the insurance industry in general, it is a lottery, right? But the name of the game is the insurance company being the house, coming out. There's going to be losses, but they're making more on the premium than what's going out. And the reason why that happens is because they rate properties properly. And with obviously by this chart here, the past 20 years, the NFIP was not rating properties based off their actual risk. And this is what we're going to go into what they're doing now to kind of weather that storm. So here's just a video I'm going to play real quick. This is FEMA's video of risk rating 2.0. It's only about a minute, and I'll go over it more in detail, but let me just play this for you real quick because it's a good visual. Yeah, so that's just a brief overview. Like I said, I'll go into it in more detail. I see someone said I'm not hearing narrative. Yeah, don't worry about it. I'm going to go over all that stuff that they talked about in detail in the next slide here. But risk rating 2.0 is out. It's officially out. Phase 1 happened in October of last year, and it was all new policies from October 1st on. So if you go get a new policy today, you're going to be under this new risk rating 2.0. And phase 2 has started April 1st on all renewals. So if your policy is renewing this week, you will start to go under risk rating 2.0 rates. And now it's going to be a gradual thing. So if you are increasing, let's just say you're paying $1,000 and risk rating 2.0 says you should be paying $2,000, you will increase on a glide path, around 15 to 18% a year until you hit that new number. So you'll go, 1,000, you'll go to 1,200, you'll go to 1,400, 1,500, then 7, up until you hit 2,000. If you go down, say you're paying 2,000 and risk rating 2.0 says you're in the middle of the country, you should only be paying 1,000. They'll drop you right down to $1,000. And this is everybody now that's renewing their policy. So existing policyholders going forward will go under risk rating 2.0. So a more detailed system. Elevation certificates are no longer required, whether you're post or pre-firm. You can submit it and it may help you, but it's not required. And now these are the things that they are taking into account to determine what the people should be paying, or homeowners and business owners, on flood insurance. So they're taking into account how much does the home cost to rebuild? What's the home value? And why does that matter? I get that question a lot, because no matter what, if you're a $250,000 house or $1 million house, you're only getting $250,000 in coverage. So why that matters is because if say you had $1 million house and that house was the flood, there's a greater chance that you're going to fully exhaust the $250,000 in building coverage. That $250,000 house may only have a $60,000 claim because it's smaller, it's not as big as a footprint. That's why that home value matters. Distance to flooding, that's another one that's important here. How close are you to the flooding source? Ground and first floor elevations, they're still looking at historical data, construction type, flood type, river class. All these things are being taken into account to determine what the rate's going to be for that person. So here's just the different flood risk zones. If you're in a low to mid risk zone, you're not required to have flood insurance. But if you're in an A or V zone, it's mandatory that you have flood insurance if you have a federally backed mortgage. And they're using all this technology from AIR, CoreLogic, Cat Risk, FEMA, U.S. Army Corps. All these, they're using all this data and they're combining it to determine, again, what these rates are for people. So now just to compare it to another insurance, because at the end of the day, flood insurance is the same as homeowners and auto. The only difference is it's through the government. Auto insurance doesn't just look at driving history. They also look at credit, type of vehicles, gender, age, and much more. Same with homeowners. They're looking at many different things to determine what the rate is. And that's what the NFIP's goal is here. It's to look into other data sources to really nail down what that person should be paying for flood insurance. So what's staying the same? The only thing that's changing is how the properties are rated. CRS discounts are still there. And actually now X zone properties get CRS discounts, which they didn't used to. So more properties will get CRS discounts. Mandatory purchase requirements, that's the same. Coverages, you'll see at the bottom in blue, that's still the same. Elevation certificate can still help and it can't hurt you. So if you submit it, it will never hurt you. So that's still the same as it always has been. And they still have statutory rate caps. So you can't just be jumped up from $1,000 to $10,000 in 1 year. It's got to gradually go up on a glide path because it's statutory. It's a rate cap that they can't just increase you to. So something that we look at, we evaluate flood risks. And we do that by looking at flood policy mistakes, flood zones, requirements. A lot of people say, well, it's the government. Shouldn't it be the same no matter where you go? While that's true, it does fall on the agent's shoulders to properly rate that person. So if you go to an insurance agent that doesn't know much about flood insurance, they could misrate somebody. I see it every day, and that person's paying a lot more than they should be. And we also can recommend products to get that mitigation discount that, products like SmartVent and all the other products that are out there, to get someone a discount. And here's 3 solutions that I look at when I'm trying to save someone money on their flood insurance. It's number 1, mitigate to compliance. So make the house more sustainable. Doing that gets an insurance discount. Correctly rating them, I just talked about that in the last slide. And also private flood insurance is an option. Private companies are coming out offering flood insurance. There are negatives to it, but the positive is it could be thousands of dollars less than what the person's paying. So they kind of can weigh what the negatives and see if it's a good option for them. And if it is, they're going to save some money that way too. So like I said, it's short and sweet, the risk rating 2.0 stuff. I hope that, I was able to educate you on it. But like I said, I've been doing it since August. So if you do have questions, there's my info, or just use the chat or just speak up at, however Vanessa wants to kind of organize it. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. And I got one here. If your rate is going up significantly, will they tell the real rate They should be, and I've been told they are. I haven't seen it yet though. They should be putting on the deck page where it says your actual risk rate. So 3,000, whatever the number is. But I haven't seen. It's not been on there yet. I've been told that they're working on it. So in a perfect world, if they get it done and do what they said they were going to do, it will be on there. Right now, I haven't seen it on there. So if you do want that, I can quote it and see what it is. But I haven't seen it on there yet. It should be on there. They said it would be. It just hasn't been yet.
Thanks, Tyler. That was a great presentation. I'd love for this next part just to be an open discussion and question and answer. So people can feel free to come off mute and ask questions, or if you want to put them in the chat, that's fine as well. And I have a question, so I'll kick it off. So one of the things that you had on your not changing slide was that there would in fact be more properties getting CRS discounts. Can you explain how or why that's the case?
Yeah. So the only reason why there is, the only thing that's changing on that is that X zones now will get the CRS discount. Previous to risk rating 2.0, X zones did not get the CRS discount. So people that do want X zone policies, again, it's not a requirement by the lender. It's more of, it's up to the homeowner or business owner to get a policy. But if they do, and you are in the CRS program, they will get a CRS discount.
Great, thanks. And we have another question in the chat. Are elevation certificates being slowly phased out?
No, because it's still used from a building standpoint. And in my head, I'm on a committee with the ASFPM for elevation certificates. My partner is. It's still, we're doing updates to it. It's still critical from a building code standpoint. It gives you, the code official, easy answers, right? Like, is it elevated? Do they have freeboard? It makes it a lot easier than reading plans and everything. And it's part of the CRS program as well. So I don't see it going anywhere, to be honest. It isn't required anymore from a flood insurance standpoint. It could still help them people. I think though, and this is just completely speculative. It's nothing I've actually heard or anything, but in my head, it's kind of going to go away from like existing houses getting ECs unless the town needs it. And it's more so only going to be used from like a new construction standpoint. That's kind of what I think is probably happening. But again, that's speculative, just from doing this a lot, but.
Hey, Tyler, I had a quick question. In your experience from what you've seen in terms of zones, so if somebody was in a V zone built correctly on piles and elevated, and somebody was a block away in an A zone built correctly to standard foundation, same size house, on an average, like would you see like something that would be like, just because zone change, even though they're built correctly, 20% increase, or like, is there anything like significant like
trying
that?
to get kind of like a rate type thing. What I'm seeing is, and this isn't every case, this is more of just a generalized statement. V zones have gone down in price from risk rating 1.0 to risk rating 2.0. To be honest, in risk rating 1.0, they were like absurd. Even a new construction house built in the V zone was paying like $3,000, $4,000. Now that house probably is paying $2,200, $2,300. I've seen some at $1,000 V zones, which I've never seen that until this happened. So I'd say V zones are going down. And then what I've been seeing also is those A zone properties that you're describing, like in those coastal type environments. I'm seeing them go up because they were probably paying, like, if they were built to compliance, they were paying cheap, like $700-800. And I'm seeing them go to like $1,500-1,600 a year. So they're not going up. They're not going up.
Coastal A? Coastal
Yeah.
A? Okay.
Yeah. Even AEs that are in coastal environments. I'm seeing, because like I said, they were paying like super cheap. They're built to compliance, which is understandable, but they're going up, but they're not going up to like $3,000. Like they're going up to like 1,500, which, you know, I know it's more expensive than what people were paying, but it's not like that crazy. Like, oh my God, it's $3,000. It's 1,500 instead of 800. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's kind of what every property is specific, but that's pretty much what I've seen for the most part. There are those outliers that like this A zone was paying 1,900, dropped down to 1,000, or there's outliers, but that's kind of the generalized what I've seen.
Okay, and the other question I had was historically, as you mentioned before, NFIP, they were capped at 250,000. Is that still the case for, and then what would they do if they wanted more? They would go to private and get that extra
excess. Yeah, they go private, they go with excess. NFIP, the only thing that's changed is how they rate properties. Everything else is the same. Coverages, requirements, laws, everything is the same. The only thing that's changed, to keep it as simple as possible, is how they rate people.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. I'm interested in historic properties, so a lot of them are, you know, pre-firm. And so there's two aspects to my question. One is, how are they determining replacement costs when it comes to historic building materials? Will they take into account replacing, you know, the cost to restore hardwood floors versus ripping them out and putting in laminate? And then number two, what if somebody is vacating their first floor of their house? And how are they determining what that first floor is? Is it still have to be the habitable level? Are they still using the same definitions?
Yeah, so your first question, replacement cost, is based off of the square footage, nothing else. So they're not taking into account hardwood floors as opposed to carpet, or like a homeowner's company would. They're just solely taking square footage. And to be honest, replacement cost really doesn't have much to do with anything on the coverage side. So if anything, and I actually been told this by the NFIP, and they've told me, if you think it's higher, just being the replacement cost, just leave it at where it is, because it's going to be cheaper premium wise. If you go in there and mess with the replacement cost and say it says 300,000, but I think it should be 600,000, the only thing I'm doing is increasing the premium for that person. It has nothing to do with the coverages or how much, because at the end of the day, they're getting 250,000 if it's full coverage, 250,000. So me changing from 300 to 600 is like the only thing it's doing is kind of like hurting the person paying. So that's why, and I've been told that by like someone's like, I don't think, because it's on the quote, it says replacement cost, and the person's like, oh, I think it should be higher, and I'm like, you don't want it to be higher because it doesn't do nothing from a coverage standpoint. There's literally no point to mess with that, unless you think it should be cheaper. Then we could, you know, figure that part out. But and then your second question, I'm hesitant now with it's getting rid of the first floor level and, you know, unfinishing it and everything. Same with elevating. It's kind of scary because I've done quotes. As many of you may have known me, I'll recommend like mitigation and give what the rate will go down to if they do the steps that we recommend. And I'm just a little skeptical of, I've done quotes of a slab on grade and then lifting it to a diagram 7, for example, and it like literally not changing. And I've done quite a few of those basements, turning them into crawl spaces, stuff like that, you know, we all have as floodplain managers, that type of idea, just like you were saying, turning a slab into a diagram 7, essentially. And the reason why I've been told by the NFIP is location and replacement cost is like 90% of what that rate is. They never have given me specifics on like, this part does this much to the rate, this part does this much. Because before risk rating 1.0, and I have them somewhere, I had the rate tables. So I knew exactly, like, you bring this from a 0 slab to a +2 diagram 7, you're going to go from this rate to that rate. Like, I can give a perfect number. With this, they haven't given me like, 60% goes to location, 20% does this, 10%. It's all on the back end of the system. So I don't know. I'm as a floodplain manager, I'm nervous about that because it's not to me, it hasn't been incentivizing people to, or it's not going to incentivize people to do things that we know as floodplain managers is going to protect their building at the end of the day. But I will add to that I've asked Dave Marstead if anything from a rating standpoint can be changed. Does it have to go to Congress? Because that's huge. Like if they, this is a new program. If they saw that they screwed up, which, let's be honest, they've screwed up before. And if they had to get it passed by Congress, it could take years. I mean, we all know that, right? So he said that they don't. They have the ability to change anything on the fly. So I'm looking at that as really a good thing because I think it needs some more time, the program. I think it needs some more claims, to be honest, because when those claims come in, and hey, just give you another example and throwing random stuff out there. Ocean City gets hit hard, let's just say the whole island. And they say, look at all these, which we know is probably true. Look at all these diagram 7s. No one had a claim. Now look at all these slabs. Everybody's got claims. Let's tweak the rate to benefit that, So that's kind of what I'm hoping. And maybe I'm hoping too much, but that's all we can do.
Thanks, Tyler. I know that Joseph has a question, and then we're going to go to Sandy's question in the chat.
Thanks, Vanessa. And hello, Tyler from Waterfront Alliance. You actually just answered my question. I was going to ask about whether there are site-specific interventions that you can do that would help reduce the claims, but it sounds like at this point, at least, there really aren't any.
No, I mean, there are mitigation credits by raising your mechanicals. And again, mechanicals have to be not above BFE. Now they have to be above the first floor level. So you have a 2-story house, it's got to be in the second story. It's not above BFE anymore, which is aggravating because the building codes don't say anything about that. They just say above BFE, freeboard and all that. But to get the credit, they technically got to be up. And vents, they, like I said, they also would get a mitigation credit. It's not huge though. I'll say, looking at like 5% is kind of the discount on average from what I've seen. I've done a lot of quotes, obviously with SmartVent, trying to show vent savings and everything. And you're looking probably about 5 to 10% maybe.
Thanks. So Sandy's question in the chat is, what are the differences between flood insurance in coastal areas versus rivers? You differentiated the middle of the country versus U.S. coastal areas.
Yeah. So to be honest, I don't know what the rate difference is because I don't know the back end of the rates. I just know that they're taking those things into account. And I can go off of just doing quotes. I've seen more inland type riverine areas are going down. And then I'm seeing that, like, I'll give you an example. One in Delaware, right near the Delaware River, a town called Gibbstown. I do a lot of business in. They all have basements. Previous risk rating 1.0, because they're well below BFE, they're all basements, and it's not a flood area. Like if you're familiar with the area, it just looks like a normal suburban area. I've seen them go from $3,000 before down to $1,000 for the most part. Like I said, off of the coastal thing, those $800 aren't really $800 anymore. They're starting at like $1,200, $1,300. So for the most part, I've seen them go up, but I don't know like exactly. I can just go off of the 5,000 quotes that we've done the past 6 months. I don't know the actual rate that they're using or anything like that. Megan's question about older or historic homes, they're not even like looking at that at all. It's not a defining characteristic. It doesn't affect the rate at all. Like I was talking about earlier, they're just going off square footage for a replacement cost standpoint. And I think someone has their hand raised.
Go ahead,
Can
Sandy.
you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I was just following up. I'm with FEMA and I live on the coast, but I do work out in Iowa and all that. And the rivers are different, of course. With the coastal areas, you have the waves that you have to design for, and the run up. It's a whole different dynamic, but still the flooding out there is quite devastating at the wetlands, and also especially the agricultural states where the more agriculture you have, the more vulnerable you have to erosion and factors like that. So there's just different characteristics of the middle of the country. So, but I just wanted to clarify, but you have to look at the geographical areas. I thought that might be something you look at. So, but I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thanks. Alrighty, we'll go to Tom and then to Charles in the chat. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Tyler, for the presentation. I have a colleague at the University of North Carolina who's in building sciences, and he's found the same trends you've seen in the ratings. He's been trying to decipher the black box, he tells me. But it seems that the closer you are to the hazard, it seems to generate the rates rather than the building sciences, which, like you said, is really a bit concerning. But I do have a question about the elevation certificate. He did notice that that makes a big difference in the premium if you do include an elevation certificate. But if they're not required, do you think that I'm thinking about the CRS rating system and what communities are doing to track and make sure elevation certificates are filed, and I think even the model flood ordinance requires elevation certificates. And so do you see that as something that's still going to be required no matter what, just because of the other policies?
I think so, because the CRS is all about better protecting your community. And I think the EC is just the easiest way to know that type of stuff, know that they have freeboard, know all that type of stuff. So I think it's still critical from that standpoint. And I think it will be continued to be critical from that standpoint on there. But to go back to real quick what you were saying about the EC, or what your the person you were working with was saying, the only time I've been told by the NFIP, the only time the EC does help is when their numbers are off. So they use LiDAR to determine their elevation levels. So if their LiDAR says it's a 2 and really it's a 6, that's going to change the rate, to the better. What I've seen, because what I do a lot, same with the mitigation, is I'll act like they have an EC because that's providing value. And if I act like they have an EC and it saves them, then I'll say, go get an EC. What I've seen, and that's about 5,000 quotes. We track every single quote because we're really trying to nail this down. I've seen about 2 out of 10 that it helps. So that's the number. And that, again, it's not a huge sample size, but that's about 5,000 quotes. And that's kind of where I'm sitting at. 2 out of 10 where it does decrease. The other 8, it doesn't do anything. Like I said, it won't go up at all. So, but it's still, if someone has one, let's use it. And if you're an experienced flood insurance agent, I mean, it's not hard to just type in, a positive elevation just to see what happens. So that's kind of what I do. Like I said, I'll just type in like 8 and whatever, and whatever the 4 levels I think they are. Or just a positive elevation just to see. And if it comes in cheaper, then I'll tell them, hey, maybe you should get an EC. But yeah.
Thanks. Charles' question in the chat is, are existing policies transferable to new owners, or are new policies required when properties change hands?
Yeah, it's still the same. They can, anyone can assume someone's existing policy. So if they want to be still in that glide path of, risk rating 2.0, if it shows they should be paying like random numbers, $10,000, and the current person's paying $2,000, I'll tell that person straight up, you should go with their current policy. Just assume it. You'll go up every year until you hit $10,000. And again, this is just random numbers. It's not an actual case, but you'll go up to $10,000, but you won't start at $10,000. So they can assume existing policies still. That's still in effect.
Thanks. Anybody else have a question?
I just added something to chat at Sandy again. I guess I'm looking beyond New Jersey too, but as far as the distance, I would think it's based on topography, so the vertical distance as well as the horizontal distance. So if you're, like, I live not far from the Delaware River, and there's areas that are very low, like say New Hope, Lambertville, that area, but then there's other areas where you're much higher above the river, like just south of Lambertville is Stockton. You're up on cliffs there. And then as far as coastal areas down in New Jersey, it's fairly flat, but up in Maine or the Pacific coast, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, you have the steep cliffs. So is there, and I'll just say really, my first disaster was Sandy, and I remember the flood, the way the flood maps, they follow the contours, they're topographic, they're not just straight lines, parallel lines. So you have the different base elevations. So that's probably a factor in proximity to the water flood source, right?
Yes, yeah, and along with historical data, so they're taking that into account too. If it's an area that floods a lot, they know that, and that's going to affect the rate.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I have a general question, Tyler. So one of the things that FEMA has said about this is it's supposed to be more equitable than the previous method of doing it. In your opinion, do you think this is more equitable?
Oh, that's a man.
The zinger, I know.
That's a zing. Jeez, I hope so. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. I think it is, and the reason why is I do nationwide. So, and areas that have taxed the system, like in the Panhandle of Florida, Louisiana, those areas that have claims every year, almost every other year. I have seen them go up substantially. And I'll say I've done an X-Zone in Florida yesterday, and it used to be $500 for an X-Zone policy. Because they're in Florida, where they're at, all that stuff, it's now $2,600. So I think this is a fix, but also they can only do so much. They can only increase rates so much. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason they're in debt is because they're not charging people enough. But then they're also the government, and they can't just say we're increasing everybody, because then they're not going to get votes. Everybody knows here how the government works. So to be honest, I don't know if it'll ever be fixed, because they can only take it up certain amount. And if they go too high, they're going to get pushed back from people, which is understandable. I mean, if I had a house in a flood zone, I don't want to pay more than I was paying, just like anything. But I'm on the other side too of, like, I know they should be paying more because they're probably going to have a claim at some point in the next 30 years. So it's just it's tough. And I don't think, like I said, I don't think they'll ever be equitable, and that's just solely speculative too. But I just don't think they will, because I don't think they can charge what they should be charging, because I don't think they'll get too much pushback. People might not be able to afford it now, and it's a tricky kind of line that they got to toe of how much can we charge people to where if there's claims, we can pay it out easily. We don't have to go to the U.S. Treasury to pull money out. But we can't charge them that much, because now they're going to write to their governors, and it's just a whole mess. So it's tough. I just don't, that's why I am for private companies more coming in. And the reason why is it creates competition, creates more options. And if they all get together and say we should be charging $5,000 a year, let's just say, random stuff I'm throwing out there, but we should all be charging $5,000 a year. Like, and I'll give you an example. You go to auto insurance quote, they're all pretty close rate wise. You maybe save $200 a year, right? But there's a reason why they're all close. Like, they're all kind of using the same data. It is what it is. Same with flood. So that's why it should be left in private companies' hands, in my opinions, because then they all get together and say, this risk is risky. And, no one's charging under $2,000. If someone wants flood insurance, they got to pay this. If not, don't buy a house in a flood zone. And there's no pushback. Right. They could care less. Whereas the government, they got to toe that line. Same with health insurance. It's a mess because of that.
Yeah. that
Sorry to
makes
go off on a
sense.
tangent, but that's
No.
my philosophy.
Yep.
Follow up to that. So Tyler, are you finding that some homeowners that aren't required to carry flood insurance aren't renewing because of the increase?
No, it's tough. I'm not, because then those are the types of people that will go to private and they'll go to whatever's cheapest, So if they can't find something cheap, yeah, they'll self-insure 100%. But normally they're more open to, I just want some form of protection. I don't care what it is. And I just want to pay as low as possible. We usually could find them something pretty cheap in the private side and kind of set them up. But or they'll, maybe they do stay with the NFIP and they just lower coverages and up deductibles. So, God forbid there's a flood, I'm willing to only get 60 grand, but at least it's something.
Yeah. I think your point about Congress, not willing to charge too much is a good one, because really you're only getting $250,000. Well, you could make multiple claims at $250,000, I suppose. But really that in the coastal zone won't make you whole.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a limit in how much coverage, right? So it's really complicated. I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah, right. I just do what they say. I try to move some needles, but
All righty. Anybody else? Well, Tyler, if that's it, thank you so much for your time today. This was a really great presentation and great question and answer. I think there's definitely a lot of questions around this topic, and you helped clear some of that up for us. So we appreciate it.
anytime. Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. And if anybody'd like me to do, I've been doing this for towns homeowners and stuff. So, feel free to just reach out and I'd be happy to get something figured out.
Great, thanks. And I will, as long as it's okay with you, I'll share your email with folks and the presentation. And you can reach out to Tyler afterwards if you have more questions.
Awesome. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.